Rational Emotive Behavioural Therapy, or REBT. I guess the roots of CBT, or Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, going back in time to speak about Mr. Albert Ellis, Rory.
Yes, Albert Ellis, who, of course, left us in 2007, but left us with a rich legacy. And indeed, as you've alluded to, Ken, the foundations of cognitive therapy. And, I don't think you can say too much about Albert Ellis, because he took kind of a behaviorist approach and made it into a therapy. And I think one of the interesting things about all of the theorists who stand the test of time is that they all bring something from their own life. I think it was John Schleen, a very famous person-centered therapist, that said all theory is autobiographical. And this certainly was the case for Albert Ellis, because he was a very shy boy, brought up in New York, and he wanted to find himself a girlfriend, and he was very shy amongst women and girls, if I can use the word girls nowadays. And he went into the local park and set himself a goal of talking to 100 women to get over that fear. And that kind of set the foundations of him challenging irrational beliefs. And that's the foundation of REBT: action, belief, and consequences. An activating event, you form a belief, and then you live the consequences. And, he had a strong philosophical base. He drew from Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic, who talked about, being stoic in the face of difficulties. The obstacle is the way, which is a very popular Stoical kind of mantra. And he also drew from Epictetus, who was another Stoic philosopher. And I think it was Epictetus who said, man isn't disturbed by what happens. It's his perceptions of what happens, if I'm getting my philosophers correctly. And he would challenge people's perceptions. And many years ago, I used a little bit of REBT on the side of the road, Ken. I was working in a hostel, and I just nipped out for my lunch, and I heard a bit of a crash. It was a car crash. Someone had pulled out from the side of the road and hit another car. And it was interesting, the two people involved, the person who had been hit was pretty sanguine about it. So, oh, well, we've got insurance, no one's dead. My bumper's just a bit scratched, and they exchanged, off they went. But the person who'd actually pulled out was quite distraught, and they were saying things like, I'll never be able to drive again. My car's a write-off. And I'm a bad driver. And she was talking to me, and I said, well, where's the evidence that your car's a write-off? And she said, well, it's bumped, the front's bumped. I said, but it still drives, doesn't it? And she went, well, yeah. And I said, where's the evidence you're a bad driver? And she said, well, I've had an accident. And I said, well, everybody has an accident. I know I have. I've had accidents. And, if you drive long enough, you're going to have a bump. And then she said, and I'll never drive again. And I said, how are you going to get home? And it was interesting that the thought process changed. And eventually it was like, yeah, well, actually, you're actually right there. And she got in the car, and off she went, and I went and got a sausage roll. But I thought that was a lovely little story. I used to share that with students when we taught about how just a practical application of, the activating event, forming a belief, and living the consequences. And what I did was gently challenged her belief.
Yeah, it's an interesting model. So we're delving into behaviorism here, I guess. And the theory tells us how we think affects how we feel, and how we feel affects how we behave. And how we behave affects how we live our lives. And if you can change the thought, you can change the consequence. So the consequence is that we may come across in difficulty within our lives. And the theory kind of suggests maybe that is rooted in an irrational belief that we think about. And if we can change the thought pattern around that belief, we can change the way that we live our lives. And it's interesting how you were saying, looking back to the Stoic philosophers of times gone by. It's really interesting when I look there, so much of what they said is just as relevant today. It's like it never wears out. It doesn't. The modern society doesn't modernize who we are as human beings and how we act and how we socialize and how we process. And the thought of it is not what happens that affects our emotions. It is how we react to what happens within ourselves. And it's based in the beliefs we have. And an example I remember of that is this is not a true story. This is kind of just an example to paint the picture. It's somebody has a cat, and the cat is run over. And the neighbor sees the cat has been run over and then decides, I better phone this owner at work. And then thinks, oh, actually, rather than phone them at work and potentially disrupt their day, I will wait until they get home. Now, here's the thing. When the person got home, the neighbor said, your cat was run over today, and the person was suddenly devastated. And if you said to that person, why are you so devastated? They might say, because my cat has been run over. Now, the interesting thing is, it's not the running over of the cat that caused the devastation. It was the hearing that the cat had been running over, the realization of that, and then how that was processed within the person. Because, of course, the cat was run over early that morning. And the person went through their day without being devastated until they heard the news. So it's how we react. It's not the cat being run over that causes the distress. It's the hearing of that and how we then choose to process it. ABCD model, as it is sometimes called, the action. For example, you crash your car, as you were saying, Rory, and then the belief, this leads you to believe that you're a bad driver. And then the consequence, you stop driving because you fear that you're going to have another accident. And that's it. You kind of held hostage. So within this model, there is a D, and that is the disputing of that irrational belief, where you might go to that person and point out that they've been maybe driving for 20 years. Where was the bad driving then? It is just this one incident. So you're disputing the irrational belief of I am a bad driver by using the evidence. You've got the evidence of the 20 years of previous driving where everything was fine. And hopefully then the process within the person themselves is that they can dispute themselves that irrational belief and come to terms with that and go, actually, you know what? I have been driving for 20 years. This was a little bit of bad luck. Or whatever that may have been, let me get back out in that car again. ABCD model.
Yes, and it's a very elegant model, I have to say, Ken. It's incredibly elegant, but also crucially, it puts thinking at the top of the food chain. So as you said earlier, with that model of how we think, how we feel, how we behave, how it affects our lives, it puts thinking at the top of the chain. And I think it's a very useful axiom to live your life by. I'm often, people who know me well will often hear me say, if asked a question, I think, I feel, and sometimes I may ponder this for a little bit. I may say, is it thinking or is it feeling? Is it thinking or is it feeling? And eventually I will fall onto either I feel this way and share my feelings about it, or I think this way and I share my thoughts about it. And I think that kind of demarcation line is about how much impact what I'm being asked it would have. So, if someone were to say to me, would you like a Ferrari? I might say,
yes, please, Rory.
I might say, oh, I feel I'd like a Ferrari, although I think I'd probably struggle getting in it nowadays. Certainly struggle getting out of one. I'd have to employ someone to pull me out. But I might say, I think, I feel that I'd love that. And then my thinking would say, well, it's totally impractical. I won't be able to get in and out of it. I couldn't afford to run it. And really, I don't think that it's really me, if I'm honest. I don't think it would fit to how I believe who I am. And I think it's a really good discipline, certainly as a therapist, to be able to demarcate those two areas, thinking and feeling. Feelings are important. We know that.
Yep.
But actually, thinking trumps it all, because no one wants a pilot. Can you imagine being in a plane And the pilot's saying, I think we're at 30,000 feet. I feel we're at 30,000 feet. I feel we've got enough fuel to land. I feel we're going in the right direction. There'd be panic in the cabin. You know, thinking is about evidence and making evidence, and feeling. There's a huge amount of room for feeling, and we know this as therapists, but I think it's about where they sit. And I think that's the legacy of cognitive therapies. It's about where it sits. And I think the other thing with REBT, it differentiates between CBT. And one of those things is that CBT sees all negative thinking as kind of irrational, you know, is the headline. REBT actually says that there's some negative thinking which actually is good for you.
Yep.
You know, so grieving, loss, anger in REBT would be considered a negative emotion. So it's kind of granular as well. It's a very, very interesting theory, and one we used to teach it. We used to teach it as opposed to CBT because of the granularity of it, Ken.
Yeah, and I like it. I find it very elegant. And when I first came across the REBT theory, I started applying it to my own life, and I found there was lots of personal development there. And we may see this present with our clients. So I'm going to share things that came up for me that then was visible within my counseling practice. Is when a client comes in and they might say, "Oh, I'm not very good at such and such a thing." Oh, I can't do that because I'm not very good at such and such a thing. And it's interesting that is going to be based in their belief. And there was some sales training I did years ago, Rory. We're back in my corporate days when I was in sales. The saying was, if you think you can, you can. And if you think you can't, then you can't. So whether you believe you can or you can't, you're 100% right. And it shows the power of the reality we create from that we think. Now, the thing is, our thinking is fallible. It is fallible. And we can create irrational beliefs, as it is called in REBT, or beliefs that are not serving us in any way, that are in some way hindering us. And you're 100% right, Rory, that some beliefs, I'm a little afraid of heights. That's a good thing. That's all right, that, you know. And there are other people that maybe are not, and they can go up mountains. But I'll stick with I am scared of heights. I'll say that and be happy to stick with it because I know it preserves my life. But not all of those irrational thoughts serve us. Some of them hold us back, and that it's about when a client may present and they're really struggling with something that is holding them back in their life based on an irrational belief, something that happened that they then kind of anchored in, that is how it is. Maybe that was how it was in that moment. But of course, the evidence may suggest that outside of that moment, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and we used to see that when we taught, didn't we, Ken? I remember, you know, first day of the class, maybe a level 2 class, and people come in and they go, "Oh, I'm Rory," and you know, welcome everybody in. We might do a bit of a kind of ice-breaking exercise. And then I'd say, so I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, tell a little about practice, and I'll say the other thing is I'm dyslexic. So if you can see a word that's not spelt correctly, as I'm not teaching an English class, I'm teaching counselling, you tell me and I'll try and correct it. And you used to get people who were absolutely stunned. They'd say, "You're a teacher and you're dyslexic." And I go, "Yeah, what's the problem with that?" And they go, "Well, I'm dyslexic, and I've been told by teachers I was stupid." I said, "So was I." I said, and they were wrong. And they were wrong, and they were wrong in your case. And you know, you breathe a sigh of relief. I remember, Ken, you talked about on the podcast your experience of that when you first went to train.
Yeah, as a dyslexic as well, and something that I hid away. And then you were my tutor, and you mentioned you were dyslexic. Wrote on the whiteboard at the time, the brand new technology that had just come in. That's how far away that was back in time.
Yeah.
And it kind of gave me permission to relook at that. You know, something that I hid, that I was ashamed of, I now proudly own. It is who I am and how I am made. I'm neurodiverse, and this is the way my head works. I'm not less than, but I used to believe I was. And because of that, there was a shame element around that where I would hide it away. So I was able to challenge the irrational belief that I'm not academic. I'm a bit slow. I'm slower than the rest. I can't excel in these kind of situations. by an example from another, which was yourself. So it's not always us as the therapist using logic to dispute the person's irrational belief. We can do that in our way of being, which is a very person-centered way, I guess, of doing it. And it's interesting when I'm saying the words person-centered here, and we're talking about behaviorism and we're talking about person-centered, they feel quite far away from each other. And I say that because you were speaking earlier, Rory, about how this is about thinking. It's about the computer part of our body that reasons and thinks. And the other side, which we deal with, I guess, a lot in therapy, is as of the I feel. And where does the I feel come from? I'm feeling this. Why? Where is the root of the I feel? Does the root of the I feel sit in an emotion which is separate from our thinking and reasoning? Or is it a result of the thinking and reasoning? So it's interesting how they meld together in a way. And we speak about in person-centered therapy, we'll talk about introjected values, the beliefs and values of others that we take on, adopt for ourselves, and then start acting from those. I'll give you an example. I'm sitting there as a scholar in my early years in school. I'm not able to keep up with the class. The teacher says, you need to try harder. You're not putting in enough work.
Ouch.
I'm feeling now, oh, hold on now. I'm feeling I am less than, I'm feeling I'm slower than. And of course, that you can put it down to say that is introjected values. If you want to look from a person-centered point of view, if you want to go to REBT, you can say, well, that is now an irrational belief that was brought about from the situation you found yourself in. I nearly didn't go and train to become a counselor. I nearly didn't do it. And then when I did do it, I nearly dropped out because I got a referred assignment and thought, you know what, there it goes. Now we're going to transactional analysis. I'm getting out my script now and I'm ticking the script that says that I can't do this. So it's interesting how all the theories kind of meld together, cover the same humanity, the human condition, Rory. And I go right back to those Stoic philosophers. They had it then already. I think all the theorists, all they did was read those early works and go, oh, that's a good idea. How can I use theoretical words to name that?
Well, I think you're right, Ken, and I think a lot of the people who developed theories were all classically educated, so they've been introduced to philosophers and writers and a wider range of thinking, and I think that, you know, as I've said before, I think all theory is autobiographical. Yeah. I think that it kind of resonated, you know, it certainly resonated with Rogers, you know, and we talked about Søren Kierkegaard. It certainly resonated with Albert Ellis when he looked at the Stoic philosophers, and from there a theory was developed. But I think it's usually taught as a comparative theory. You can do REBT training, but it's usually not, in my experience, a first training. It's usually a comparison as part of compare and contrast different theories. But in practice, it is mightily useful because you can challenge someone's perception quite gently. And you don't have to be an outward challenge. You can say, you know, I've had clients who said, you know, I felt myself really, really frightened when that happened. And I would say, well, you know, if that happened to me, I'd be frightened. And they say, really? And I go, yes. And that can generate huge amounts of movement. When someone else says, well, you know, I would have thought or felt the same way as you, that alters the thinking. And the thinking then is, oh goodness, someone else reacts like that. I'm not on my own. And I think that's really, really important. But it's interesting, and I'd issue a challenge out there to anybody. You know, how often do you actually catch yourself saying, I'm thinking or I'm feeling? Do you differentiate them? And if you don't, maybe worth thinking, if that might be a good idea. It's certainly been useful for my personal development, Ken.
Yeah, definitely. And a great place to explore that is your journal. What kind of language are you using when you're writing your journal and recording what came up for you in the day? And I'd like to end this topic, Rory, pretty much doing full circle to where we started. And you were speaking about Marcus Aurelius, and you were saying the obstacle is the way. It's a lovely saying. I hold that saying very dear to me. Yeah. The obstacle is the way. You know, as therapists, we're working with those that come to us to share the darker parts of their journey, the struggles that they face in life. And by working and serving that client group, there are times when people will have a breakthrough, like where maybe an irrational thought may be disputed and the person is freed from that. And the freeing from that liberation from that, can make such a massive impact. And I look to myself, my irrational belief of I am stupid, I'm not academic, I can't do this, I'm slower than others. Once I was released from that, I was able to study, get quite good at studying, enjoy studying. And if it hadn't been for the release from that, counseling tutor would never have been born. We would never have taught together, Rory. We would never have created the counseling tutor. There would be no counseling tutor podcast. So the obstacle of me feeling that stuckness and I'm less than was an obstacle. But after getting over that obstacle, being freed from that obstacle, the obstacle of, it's not just me who struggles with this, thousands struggle. When we're teaching with you, Rory, how many of our students said, I'm not very academic, I wasn't very good in a school environment. So many. Recognizing that, using that obstacle to make a way for others, which is hopefully the founding principles of counseling tutor. Lovely topic. Thanks for bringing it, Rory.